Dust motes and quiet routines, the scent of aged parchment and dry ink was Alara's most cherished perfume. Dust motes, like tiny, sun-drenched stars, danced in the shafts of light that pierced the high, arched windows of the Grand Archives, illuminating the silent reverence of her domain. Each morning, precisely at dawn, she unlocked the massive oak doors, their ancient hinges groaning a familiar welcome. Her footsteps, soft and measured, echoed through the cavernous halls as she made her way to her designated section, the repository of forgotten lore. Today's task was the meticulous cataloguing of the recently unearthed scrolls from the sunken city excavation. Their brittle edges crumbled slightly beneath her careful touch, each character on the faded vellum a whisper from a bygone era. Alara worked with a quiet intensity, her slender fingers smudged with ink and dust, moving deftly over the delicate material. She used a fine-tipped quill to transcribe the inventory numbers into her ledger, her handwriting as precise and elegant as the ancient calligraphy she so admired. The rustle of paper, the gentle scratching of her quill, and the distant hoot of an owl from the rafters were the only sounds that dared intrude upon her sanctuary. She loved this predictability, this rhythmic dance of order and knowledge. Each day unfolded with a comforting sameness. The early rise, the solitary breakfast of oatcakes and herbal tea, the purposeful walk to the archives, and then hours immersed in the quiet contemplation of history. It was a life built on solid ground, free from the chaotic currents that often swirled beyond these walls. Here, within the embrace of the past, she found solace and a profound sense of purpose. The texts didn't judge, didn't demand, didn't leave. They simply were, waiting patiently to be understood, to have their stories preserved. Her mind drifted, tracing the intricate patterns of a faded, illuminated manuscript. She imagined the hands that had penned these words centuries ago, the lives they had led, the world they had inhabited. There was a unique intimacy in touching something that had passed through so many hands, bearing witness to so much time. It was a connection that transcended generations, a quiet conversation across the centuries. This was her world, a universe contained within these shelves, where every answer, every truth, felt within reach. A particularly stubborn piece of vellum resisted her attempts to unfurl it, threatening to tear. Alara paused, taking a slow, calming breath. Patience, she reminded herself, was the archivist's most potent tool. With renewed care, she gently humidified the edges with a specialized mist, then slowly, painstakingly, began to unroll it. A faint, almost imperceptible image began to emerge. A stylized depiction of a soaring phoenix, its wings spread wide as if taking flight. A small, contented smile touched her lips. Another fragment of beauty rescued from oblivion. The afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting longer, warmer shadows across the room. Alara was preparing her workspace for the evening, carefully reshelving the processed texts and covering the more fragile ones with protective cloths. She straightened her quill, wiped away the lingering dust from her desk, and surveyed her work with quiet satisfaction. The day had been productive, peaceful, and perfectly aligned with the predictable rhythm of her existence. She hummed a soft, wordless tune as she latched the heavy window shutters, sealing the archives against the encroaching twilight. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of rain that often preceded the evening mists. Alara reached for her cloak, her mind already anticipating the gentle quietude of her small cottage, the familiar scent of wood smoke from her hearth, and the well-worn pages of her current evening read. Then it came, a sharp, frantic thump, thump, thump against the heavy oak door. It wasn't the polite, measured knock of a messenger or the casual tap of a fellow scholar. This was an insistent, desperate pounding, loud enough to rattle the ancient wood, loud enough to make the dust motes in the air vibrate. It shattered the serene silence like a dropped glass, echoing through the vast, empty halls. Alara froze, her hand halfway to her cloak, her breath hitched in her throat. Who would be at her door at this hour? No one ever disturbed her after the closing bells. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs, mirroring the insistent assault on the door. Fear, cold and sudden, snaked its way through her veins. chilling her to the bone. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to hide among the towering shelves, to become another silent, forgotten text. But the pounding continued, more urgent now, accompanied by a choked, desperate cry. "Alara! Please, open the door!" The voice, raw and broken, ripped through the last vestiges of her composure. It was a voice she knew intimately, a voice that had been a constant in her life for as long as she could remember. A voice that, in its current state of despair, struck a deeper, more profound fear into her than any nameless threat could have. "Reese," she whispered, the name a fragile breath on her lips. The world, her predictable, ordered world, tilted on its axis. The quiet routine, the comforting predictability lay in shards around her. A storm breaks. The frantic thudding against the heavy oak door continued, each strike a hammer blow against Alara's carefully constructed tranquility. It wasn't Reese. The voice, ragged and raw, was deeper, less familiar in its distress. Then a name, choked with a sob. "Alara! Please, Alara!" Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This wasn't a casual visit. This was an emergency. Her hand trembled as she unlatched the bolts, the metallic clatter echoing unnaturally in the sudden quiet that had fallen outside. The door swung inward, revealing not Reese, but Leo. He stood on her threshold, a ghost of his usual vibrant self. His usually impeccably tailored clothes were rumpled, his dark hair dishevelled, falling across eyes that were red-rimmed and swollen. A faint stubble shadowed his jaw, a stark contrast to his habitually clean-shaven face. He looked utterly broken, a shattered mosaic of the man she knew. "Leo?" Her voice was a mere whisper, barely audible above the sudden, violent thumping of her own heart. He stumbled forward, collapsing against her, his arms wrapping around her with a desperate strength that stole her breath. He was shaking, a profound, visceral tremor that vibrated through her own body. The scent of him, a faint lingering of his expensive cologne mixed with something sharp and unfamiliar, like stale tears and despair, filled her senses. "She left me, Alara," he choked out, the words muffled against her shoulder. "She actually left me." Alara's carefully ordered world, already teetering from the previous night's disruption, crumbled completely. Leo. Divorce. The words were a jumble of incongruous sounds, impossible to reconcile with the vivacious, confident man she had known for years. She instinctively tightened her embrace, her hand coming up to cradle the back of his head, feeling the soft silk of his hair against her palm. Come in," she murmured, guiding him gently into the antechamber. He was heavy, almost dead weight, and she had to brace herself to keep him upright. The scent of old paper and leather, usually a comforting embrace, felt suddenly sterile, unwelcoming against the raw grief emanating from him. He allowed her to lead him to the worn velvet sofa in her small sitting room, a piece of furniture more for aesthetic than comfort, which now seemed to swallow him whole. He sank into it, his body slumping, his head falling back against the cushions. His eyes were closed, tears still tracking paths down his temples, disappearing into his hair. Alara knelt beside him, her hand hovering uncertainly over his arm. "Leo, what happened?" "When?" He opened his eyes, a depth of pain in them that made her own chest ache. "Last night. She just packed her bags. Said she couldn't do it anymore." His voice was hoarse, raspy, as if he had been screaming for hours. "Said I was too much, too demanding. Said she needed space." He laughed then, a dry, bitter sound devoid of humour. Space. After 10 years, a cold dread seeped into Alara. She had always admired the easy affection between Leo and his wife, Clara. Their marriage had seemed like an unshakable fortress, a beacon of stability. To see it shattered so completely was disorienting, unsettling. It made her own solitary existence feel even more precarious. "I'm going to make you some tea," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. It was a practical, mundane offer, a small anchor in the storm of his grief, a gesture of protection, of care. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance, lost in the wreckage of his life. Alara rose, moving quietly to her small, efficient kitchen. The familiar clatter of porcelain against porcelain, the soft hiss of the kettle beginning to boil, were small comforts in the sudden oppressive silence of the apartment. She chose her finest Darjeeling, a blend known for its soothing properties, and added a generous dollop of honey, knowing Leo's sweet tooth. As she waited for the water to heat, her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this catastrophe. Leo had always been the strong one, the charismatic one, the one who navigated life with an enviable ease. To see him so utterly broken, it was terrifying. It exposed a vulnerability in the world she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She returned to the sitting room, 2 steaming mugs carefully balanced on a small tray. Leo was still slumped on the sofa, his eyes closed once more. The lamp on the side table cast a soft, warm glow, illuminating the streaks of tears on his face. He looked impossibly young, impossibly fragile. She set the tray down on the low table in front of him, the gentle thud of the ceramic a small interruption. He stirred, slowly opening his eyes. She offered him a mug, the warmth radiating from the cup a small, tangible comfort. He took it, his fingers trembling as they closed around the porcelain. "Thank you, Alara," he whispered, his voice still rough. He didn't meet her gaze, his eyes fixed on the swirling steam rising from the tea. Alara sat beside him, not too close, but close enough for him to feel her presence. She said nothing more, knowing that sometimes silence was the most profound comfort. The quiet hum of the archives, usually her sanctuary, now felt like a vast, echoing space, filled only with the sound of his ragged breathing and the quiet drip of her own anxieties. A storm had broken, and she was bracing for the deluge. Echoes of the past days flowed into nights with an unvarying rhythm. The aroma of Alara's brewing chamomile tea became as ingrained in Leo's world as the persistent ache in his chest. His initial shock had settled into a dull, persistent throb, a constant reminder of the chasm Clara had left. Alara, a quiet anchor in his swirling uncertainty, was a steady presence. He increasingly found himself on her worn sofa, sometimes staring blankly ahead, other times pouring out his heart until his voice was raw. She just wasn't happy anymore, Leo confessed one evening, his gaze fixed on a dust mote dancing in the lamplight. 10 years, Alara, a decade, and she simply wasn't happy. He absently traced the rim of his cooling mug. No arguments, no dramatic explosions, just a quiet, unshakable certainty that she needed to leave, as if she'd meticulously planned it for months. His voice fractured on the last word. Alara sat a comfortable distance away, yet her presence felt encompassing. She offered no platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, she simply listened, her eyes soft, occasionally reaching out to replenish his tea or nudge a plate of shortbread closer. She absorbed his pain, letting it wash over her without judgment, a silent witness to the unravelling of a life. He recounted the sterile conversations, the polite but firm refusal to reconsider, the chilling efficiency with which Clara had packed her belongings and departed. It was like watching a perfectly constructed sandcastle dissolve in agonizing slow motion, he murmured, a mirthless chuckle escaping him, and I could only stand there. It wasn't your fault, Leo. Alara's voice was a gentle current against the jagged edges of his despair. Sometimes people evolve, and occasionally those evolutions steer them in new directions. She knew it was a simplification, but it was a truth he desperately needed, a bulwark against the self-blame that threatened to consume him. He truly saw her then, noticing the faint lines of concern around her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to bear a fraction of his burden. "You're good for me, Alara," he said, a genuine, if fleeting smile touching his lips. "Always have been." The confession hung in the air, a delicate thread weaving their shared past into the present moment. A comfortable silence followed, rich with unspoken understanding. Later, as the city outside settled into its nocturnal hum, a different kind of conversation began to unfold. "Remember that time we tried to dam Miller's Creek?" Leo asked, a faraway look in his eyes, and the whole thing collapsed, drowning Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. Alara's lips curved into a genuine smile, a rare sight these days. She chased us with her garden hose for a whole block. She recalled, a lightness entering her voice. You tripped, and I swear I heard her cackle. Hey, I was protecting you, he protested playfully, a spark of his old charm flickering. A chivalrous knight, facing down a fearsome petunia protector. They laughed, a shared, spontaneous sound that cut through the lingering melancholy. It was a fragile sound, but undeniably real. They reminisced about scraped knees, clandestine forts, and the grand escapades of childhood summers. They spoke of the awkwardness of adolescence, the crushes and the heartbreaks, the whispered secrets exchanged beneath starry skies. Each memory was a small, polished stone, unearthed from the riverbed of their shared history, radiating the warmth of their intertwined past. As the hours dwindled, a different kind of closeness settled between them, not the intense, romantic kind, but a deep, comforting intimacy born of shared experience and unwavering trust. The echoes of their past weren't just memories, they were the bedrock of a bond that had weathered years of separation, and now, subtly, began to reshape itself. Leo, for the first time since Clara's departure, felt a flicker of something beyond despair, and Ilara, always reserved, found a quiet strength in simply being there, a steady beacon for a friend lost in the dark. The lingering touch. The rain hammered against the old window panes of Leo's study, a relentless drumming that had replaced the quiet hum of the evening. Outside, the world was a blur of grey and green, washed clean by the downpour. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly with old books and the coffee Ilara had just brewed. Leo sat hunched over a collection of vintage photographs, Clara's face smiling out from several of them, a ghost in sepia tones. His shoulders were tight, a familiar knot of grief and frustration blooming anew. Ilara watched him from the doorway, a mug steaming in her hands. The rhythmic patter of the rain seemed to amplify his silent struggle, pulling at a chord deep within her. He hadn't spoken much that evening, just stared at the images, his jaw clenched. Crossing the room, she set her mug down on the coaster beside his elbow and gently took the stack of photos from his trembling fingers. He didn't resist, his gaze remaining fixed on the empty space where they'd been. Without a word, Ilara sat beside him on the worn leather armchair. Her presence, a quiet anchor in the storm of his emotions, was a comfort he hadn't realized he craved until it was offered. His hand, resting on his knee, was broad and calloused, a stark contrast to her own slender fingers. On an impulse, a silent offering of solace, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. Her touch was feather-light, barely there, yet it was enough. Leo flinched, a small, involuntary twitch, then slowly relaxed into the contact. He didn't look at her, but his thumb moved, tracing the delicate bones beneath her skin. The rain continued its mournful song, but in that small, shared space, a different kind of quiet settled, one of unspoken understanding, of comfort found in the simplest of gestures. The ache in his chest, a constant companion these past weeks, softened, just a fraction. The next morning, Ilara woke with a strange lightness she hadn't felt in years. As she made her way to the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee already brewing told her Leo was up. A small, almost imperceptible flutter started in her stomach. It wasn't just the coffee she anticipated. It was his quiet presence, his resonant voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, even faintly. She found herself subconsciously tidying her hair, smoothing the front of her shirt, a subtle preening she hadn't engaged in since ever, really. The thought made her blush, a warmth spreading up her neck. He was at the counter, spooning sugar into his mug, his back to her. The sunlight, tentative after the storm, cast a soft halo around his dark hair. As he turned, his gaze met hers across the sun-drenched kitchen. A beat of silence stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Ilara felt a peculiar shift, a quickening of her pulse. It wasn't just the familiarity of their long friendship anymore. There was a new current humming beneath the surface, a subtle, almost imperceptible charge. Later that afternoon, they were sorting through some of Leo's old childhood possessions in the attic, dusty boxes filled with faded toys, school projects, and comic books. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. Leo knelt, pulling out a battered spaceship model, a fond smile playing on his lips. Elara leaned over him, peering at the intricate details. Their shoulders brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a strange warmth through Elara. He turned his head to explain a battle scar on the spaceship's wing, and for a moment their faces were inches apart. Leo's eyes, a startling shade of blue, held hers. The air thickened, charged with an unacknowledged intensity. Elara could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of his skin, a mix of coffee and something uniquely Leo. Her breath hitched. His gaze lingered, a silent question in its depths, before he cleared his throat and shifted, the moment dissolving like smoke, but the echo of it remained, a quiet hum, beneath her skin. Elara found herself aware of him in a way she hadn't been before, the subtle shift of his weight, the cadence of his voice, the way he ran a hand through his hair when he was thoughtful. His presence, once a comforting background hum, was now a resonant chord, pulling her attention, demanding a different kind of focus. She knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her that something between them was changing, slowly, irrevocably, like the quiet turning of the earth, the unspoken language. The scent of old paper and dust, usually a comforting balm, now felt like a thick blanket in the attic, trapping the burgeoning tension between them. Elara's breath hitched. The image of Leo's unguarded gaze burned into her memory. He had looked at her with a raw vulnerability that bypassed all her usual defences. She'd fled then, a sudden, primal instinct to escape the intensity that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed world. Downstairs, the quiet was a physical thing, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She busied herself with trivial tasks, polishing an already gleaming surface, rearranging books that were already perfectly aligned. The attic silence, however, was soon broken by the soft thud of footsteps descending the stairs. Leo found her in the living room, a half-read book forgotten in her lap. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, painting the scene in hues of gold and amber. He didn't sit immediately, choosing instead to lean against the doorframe, his presence filling the space with an unspoken question. "Elara," he began, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual playful lilt. "We need to talk." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, tracing the worn pattern on the sofa with her fingertip. "I know." He pushed off the doorframe, moving to sit opposite her. The air between them crackled, charged with the unacknowledged emotions that had been simmering for days. I haven't been myself," he said, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Clara leaving, it just gutted me. And you've been amazing, Elara. More than a friend." Her head snapped up, finally meeting his eyes. His were clouded with a depth of sadness she hadn't seen before, a profound weariness that went beyond the initial shock of his separation. "I was so lost," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "completely untethered. And you were the anchor I didn't even know I needed. But it's more than that, isn't it?" Elara's throat tightened. The words were heavy, weighty with implications. She wanted to deny it, to retreat into the safe haven of their long-established friendship, but the truth was a persistent current pulling her under. "Leo," he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze unwavering. "I felt like I'd lost everything that mattered. My home, my future, the person I thought I'd spend my life with. And then you started to feel like home." The honesty in his voice was a raw, visceral thing, tearing through her usual reticence. She felt a tremor run through her. This was the precipice she'd been circling, the edge of a cliff she was terrified to step off. "Loneliness," Elara confessed, the word escaping her lips before she could censor it. "It's a different kind of ache when you're used to sharing your life, isn't it?" She thought of her own quiet, solitary existence, suddenly feeling the weight of it in a new, sharper way. Even when you've always been alone, the idea of someone leaving, it makes you feel how fragile it all is. Leo reached across the small space separating them, his hand resting gently on hers. His touch was warm, comforting, yet it sent a jolt through her, a spark that ignited a different kind of longing. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed. Really seeing someone." being seen. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a feather-light touch that left a trail of goosebumps. You see me, Ilara? The real me. Not the charming facade, not the grieving husband, but me. His gaze intensified, pulling her in, demanding a response that went beyond words. Her breath hitched again, the air growing thick with unspoken emotions. The space between them seemed to shrink, filled with a magnetic pull she could no longer ignore. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His eyes, usually so expressive, were now dark pools reflecting her own confusion and nascent desire. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint, familiar scent of him, wood smoke and something uniquely Leo. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat signalling a moment of profound change. Her own hand, almost unconsciously, turned in his, her fingers lacing with his. The small gesture was an invitation, a surrender. His lips, soft and hesitant at first, brushed against hers. It was a question, a tentative exploration. Then with a soft groan that vibrated against her mouth, the hesitation vanished. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate, a release of all the pent-up emotions and unspoken truths that had simmered between them. It was a kiss of shared vulnerability, of nascent hope, and a silent promise of something new and terrifyingly beautiful. Flight and fear. The world lurched, then steadied, leaving Ilara breathless. Leo's kiss, the soft pressure, the faint scent of aged paper mingling with his unique, grounding warmth, had been a sudden, blinding revelation. Yet the light had barely ignited before a wave of pure panic crashed over her. Her mind, usually an ordered sanctuary, shattered into a frantic chorus of, "No, this is wrong, too much, you can't." Her hands, which had cautiously risen to cup his face, recoiled as if burned. She pushed back, a raw, inarticulate sound catching in her throat. The abrupt recoil disoriented Leo. His arms, just beginning to draw her nearer, froze mid-air. The tender light in his eyes, still luminous with shared emotion and nascent desire, was instantly doused by confusion. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low, questioning rumble that seemed to reverberate through her very core. I can't," she stammered, the words a flimsy barricade against the onslaught of her terror. Her gaze darted, desperate to fix on anything but the burgeoning hurt in his eyes. The dusty rafters, the stacks of forgotten ledgers, the dancing motes of dust in the thin light filtering through the attic window. Anything to escape the potent intensity of his presence. This isn't right. I need to go." She wrenched away fully, a sudden, violent separation that left a raw ache in her chest, as if she'd torn something vital from herself. The air between them, moments ago thick with unspoken longing and vulnerable intimacy, now crackled with brittle tension. Leo watched her, his expression a complex tableau of bewilderment and blossoming sorrow. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not right," he repeated, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth, edged now with fragile disbelief. "Ilara, what are you talking about?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird, trapped. Her breath hitched. How could she articulate the sudden, overwhelming fear that had seized her? The terror of this uncharted territory? How to explain the visceral understanding that this was more than a fleeting moment, but a chasm opening, threatening to engulf her meticulously constructed world? It wasn't merely the impropriety, nor the lingering ghost of Clara, though those shadows flickered at the edges of her awareness. It was the sheer force of the feeling, how it had stripped her bare, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since childhood. I can't. Not now. Not like this," she managed, her voice thin and reedy. She risked a glance, seeing the slump of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand as he raked it through his hair. The sight twisted a knife in her gut. She had hurt him. She had taken his vulnerability, his burgeoning hope, and crushed it beneath the weight of her own cowardice. A wave of self-loathing, thick and suffocating, washed over her. She yearned to reach out, to smooth the furrow in his brow, to explain it wasn't him, but her, always her, retreating from anything that threatened to shatter her quiet existence. But the words caught, choked by the knot of fear. "Leo, please. I need to think," she mumbled, already backing towards the attic door, her movements jerky and desperate. Every instinct screamed for flight, to put distance between herself and this overwhelming emotion before it consumed her entirely. The longing, a fierce, undeniable current beneath her panic, warred with her ingrained caution. She wanted to stay, to melt into his embrace again, to explore the intoxicating promise of that kiss. But the fear was a shriller siren, drowning out all other thoughts. He remained motionless, a statue carved from confusion and pain, watching her retreat. The look in his eyes, a blend of hurt and a bewildering sense of betrayal, branded her soul. "Elara," he said again, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, yet resonating with a depth that pierced her frantic flight. "Don't—" But it was too late. Her hand was already on the doorknob, cold metal beneath her trembling fingers. She yanked it open, the sudden creak echoing in the attic's abrupt silence. Without another word, without daring to look back, Elara stumbled out, leaving Leo alone amidst the dust and shadows, a silent witness to her desperate escape. The heavy door swung shut behind her with a soft thud, a final punctuation mark on her panicked retreat. A retreat into solitude. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights in the municipal archives was usually Elara's balm, a steady thrum against the chaos of the outside world. Today it felt like a silent accusation. Every shadow seemed to stretch Leo's face into exaggerated angles. Every rustle of parchment sounded like his whispered name. She'd spent the morning meticulously cataloguing a donation of 19th century ledgers, her movements precise, almost robotic, a desperate attempt to outrun the memory of his lips on hers, the frantic beat of her own heart. He'd called, of course, 3 times yesterday evening, a quick text asking if she was okay, then another, longer one, full of concern and a bewildered apology. She'd stared at the glowing screen, her thumbs hovering before shutting off her phone, plunging herself into a self-imposed digital darkness. Now her landline, a relic she kept purely for emergencies, buzzed. She ignored it, letting the answering machine dutifully pick up. Leo's voice, a little strained, filled the quiet office. "Elara, look, I really need to talk to you. Please, just call me back." Her stomach clenched. This was precisely what she'd feared. The messiness, the emotional fallout. Her sanctuary, once impenetrable, now felt porous, vulnerable. Later that afternoon, a shadow fell across her desk. Elara looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Leo stood there, framed by the archway, his usually vibrant eyes clouded with a hurt she'd inflicted. He looked rumpled, a day's growth of stubble darkening his jaw, his shoulders slumped. The sight of his raw vulnerability sent a fresh wave of panic through her. "Elara," he began, his voice low, a plea. She immediately stiffened, her hand reaching for the stack of archival boxes, a physical barrier between them. "Leo, I'm quite busy right now. I have a deadline." The words felt brittle, even to her own ears. He took a step closer, ignoring her thinly veiled dismissal. "Busy? Elara, what happened? You just ran. I don't understand." His gaze was unwavering, demanding an explanation she couldn't articulate. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "There's nothing to understand, Leo. It was a mistake. A moment of confusion. We're friends. Good friends. And that's all we can be." She gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. His expression hardened, a flash of something akin to anger replacing the hurt. "Confusion? Elara, I don't confuse a kiss like that, and neither did you. Don't lie to me." The accusation stung. She felt exposed, her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Don't you dare accuse me of lying, Leo. I'm telling you it was inappropriate. We both know it." She pushed herself away from the desk, creating more distance. "You're vulnerable right now. You're grieving. I shouldn't have let things get out of hand. It was an error in judgment on my part." He stared at her, his mouth a thin line. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a profound weariness. So that's it. You're just shutting me out after everything? His voice was barely a whisper. She couldn't meet his gaze, focusing instead on a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. It's for the best, Leo. For both of us. We need to maintain our boundaries. The words tasted like ash. He let out a short, hollow laugh. Boundaries? Right. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. Fine, Ilara, if that's what you need. But don't pretend this is about me being vulnerable. You're running. You always run. He turned abruptly and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence he left behind. Ilara sank back into her chair, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving her hollow. The archives, her haven, now felt immense and empty. The familiar smell of old paper tinged with the scent of his receding presence. The silence, once comforting, pressed in on her, amplifying the tremor in her hands. She picked up a pristine ledger, its pages beckoning, but the intricate script blurred before her eyes. The precise lines, the ordered entries, offered no solace. The quiet hum of the lights, once a gentle lullaby, now sang a mournful, solitary tune. The unbearable loss. The familiar comfort of sandalwood and old paper, usually a balm to Ilara, now felt constricting. Her apartment's silence, once a treasured solace, had morphed into a hollow echo, amplifying the frantic thrum of her own pulse. Leo hadn't called since their argument. This quiet felt far more unnerving than any shouted words. A leaden premonition settled in her gut, a tightening dread she couldn't shake. Driven by an inexplicable pull, she found her feet carrying her towards his building, a path worn into her memory from countless childhood visits. Her hand hovered over the cold brass doorknob, fraught with indecision. What could she possibly say? What did she even desire? Before she could resolve the quandary, the door gave way, revealing Leo. His face was devoid of its usual smile. His eyes, typically alight with vitality, were veiled by a weary resignation that pierced her. He was packing. A half-zipped duffel sagged on the worn floorboards, spilling a familiar blue hoodie and a stack of books. A neat stack of folded shirts waited on the armchair, poised for confinement. The small, framed photo of him and his ex-wife, a conspicuous fixture on his bedside table, was conspicuously absent. His movements were precise, almost clinical, as if performing a task rehearsed 1,000 times. He barely registered her presence, his gaze locked on the contents of a small box he was meticulously taping shut. "Leo?" Her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible in the sudden stillness. He flinched, as if startled, then slowly turned. His eyes met hers, stripped of their customary warmth, replaced by a distant politeness that sent a chill through her. "Ilara," he acknowledged, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "I was just finishing up." "Finishing up what?" The question felt foolish, the answer glaringly obvious amidst the disarray of his life. He sighed, raking a hand through his already dishevelled hair. "Leaving. I need to get away. Clear my head. This city. It's too much right now." He gestured vaguely around the room, encompassing their shared history, the remnants of a life he was dismantling piece by piece. A crushing weight settled on Ilara's chest, making breath a struggle. This wasn't merely a trip. It was an excision. He was severing ties, erasing himself from her immediate orbit. The casual dismissal she had thrown at him, the callous words about mistakes and errors in judgment, reverberated in the sudden vastness of the room. They had pushed him away, not just from her, but from everything familiar, everything comforting. "Where will you go?" she managed, her throat tight. He shrugged, picking up a small, worn, leather-bound journal. "Don't know yet. Maybe my cousin's place upstate, or just drive until I stop." His gaze lingered on the journal, a wistful shadow briefly crossing his face, before he tucked it into a side pocket of theffel bag. Ilara watched him, a cold dread blossoming into full-blown panic. This was it. He was leaving, and it was her fault. The image of him, hurt and confused, walking away from her at the archives, played on a loop in her mind. She had propelled him to this precipice. Her fear, her inability to acknowledge the raw, powerful emotions that had surged between them, had driven him to this. "Leo, wait," she said, her voice stronger now, imbued with an urgency she hadn't known she possessed. "You can't just leave." He finally looked at her fully, his eyes holding a profound sadness that was almost unbearable. "Why not, Alara? What's left here for me? I thought we had something real. You made it clear I was mistaken." His voice was devoid of anger, just a profound weariness that spoke of a spirit stretched to its breaking point. The words hung in the air, accusations sharper than any shouted retort. He was right. She had dismissed them, out of a fear so potent it had blinded her to the consequences. She had always prided herself on her meticulousness, her careful planning, but in that moment of intimacy, she had been reckless, even cruel. And now, the true cost of her cowardice was staring her in the face, embodied in the man who was systematically erasing himself from her life. The thought of him gone, truly gone, a void where his laughter, his presence, his unwavering support had been, was a pain unlike anything she had ever known. A gnawing, visceral ache. She couldn't let him go, not like this. Not when she finally understood the depth of her own feeling, now that it was on the brink of being lost forever. "Leo, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't go. Not yet." The words were out, raw and unfiltered. A desperate plea torn from the deepest part of her soul. Its truth unveiled. The city lights blurred through Ilara's tear-filled eyes as she sprinted, each breath a ragged gasp. Her lungs burned, a sharp counterpoint to the searing ache in her chest. The cool night air whipped strands of hair across her face, but she barely registered it. Her focus narrowed to one desperate, unyielding thought. Leo. She had to find him. She had to stop him. The metallic tang of fear mixed with the salt of her tears on her tongue, a potent cocktail of regret and burgeoning hope. She burst through the lobby doors of his building, barely coherent as she stammered his apartment number to the night concierge. The elevator ride felt interminable, each floor a slow, agonizing crawl. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her onward. When the doors finally hissed open, she was running again, her hand already reaching for his door, even before she fully registered seeing it. It stood ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling into the dim hallway. Her stomach clenched. He was still here. He hadn't left. Pushing the door open further, she found him in the living room, a half-packed box of books at his feet, his back to her. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart. He looked smaller somehow, hunched over, a picture of weary resignation. This wasn't the vibrant, laughing Leo she knew. This was a man on the brink of erasure, and the thought of it tore through her. "Leo!" she choked out, her voice raw, barely a whisper. He stiffened, then slowly turned. His eyes, usually so full of life, were shadowed, etched with a deep weariness that twisted her gut. He saw her, standing there, breathless, tear-streaked, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Alara?" His voice was hoarse, tinged with surprise, and something else she couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a flicker of residual hope, quickly extinguished by his self-protective instincts. What are you doing here?" She stumbled forward, driven by an urgency that overshadowed all her usual reticence. "Don't go," she pleaded, the words tumbling out, unbidden, from a place deep within her she'd kept locked away for years. "Please, Leo, don't go." He frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Alara, we talked. There's nothing keeping me here. I need a fresh start." His gaze was distant, already looking beyond her, beyond this city. "There is," she cried, finally reaching him, her hands instinctively grasping his arms. His skin felt warm beneath her trembling fingers. The contact was electric, anchoring her, pulling her back from the edge of her own despair. "There's me, Leo. I'm keeping you here." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and she saw the confusion deepen, mixed with a hint of something fragile, something she'd almost crushed. "I love you," she blurted, the words a dam breaking, a torrent of emotion she'd held captive for so long. "God, Leo, I've loved you for years. Since we were kids, probably. I didn't know what it was, or I was too scared to admit it, even to myself." His eyes widened, his lips parting slightly in disbelief. She could see the exact moment the words registered, the exact moment his world tilted on its axis. "Remember that time you broke your arm falling out of the oak tree in my backyard?" She continued, her voice gaining strength as the truth poured out. "I stayed by your side the whole night, even though I was terrified of hospitals. I told myself it was just because you were my best friend. But even then, my stomach was doing flips. And all I wanted was to make you smile again." She took a shaky breath, her gaze locked on his. "And when you went away to college, and I felt like a part of me was missing, like the world had lost its colour, I blamed it on missing my study buddy. But it was more, Leo. It was always more." Her grip tightened on his arms. "And every time you brought a girlfriend around, I'd analyse her, looking for flaws, telling myself I was just protecting you. But really, I was jealous. Green with envy, because she had what I secretly wanted, what I was too afraid to reach for." Tears streamed down her face, hot and insistent. "I saw you, Leo. I saw you through all of it. I saw your kindness, your humour, your boundless optimism. I saw the way you lit up a room, the way you made everyone feel seen. And I loved you for it. I loved you for all of it. And when your wife left, and you came to me, broken, I swore I wouldn't let anything happen to you. I swore I'd be your rock, your safe harbour. But then you kissed me, and it shattered everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built to protect myself." She finally met his gaze, raw and exposed. "I panicked, Leo. I was terrified of feeling something so big, so real, so outside my carefully constructed world. So I pushed you away. I said those awful things because I was scared of losing you if I admitted the truth, and even more scared of what it would mean if I didn't." His expression was a complex tapestry of shock, confusion, and a slowly dawning comprehension. He stood utterly still, absorbing every word, his breathing shallow. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the weariness in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. A small, tentative smile touched his lips, transforming his face, chasing away the shadows. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, a profound relief washing over his features. "You love me." It wasn't a question of disbelief, but of profound, overwhelming joy. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with tears and the immense, terrifying relief of having finally said the words. He reached out, his hands covering hers, his grip firm, reassuring. I thought I'd lost you forever." His voice cracked. "I thought I'd made a colossal mistake, and you hated me for it." "Never," she whispered, shaking her head vehemently. "Never, Leo. How could I ever hate you? I was stupid. So incredibly stupid." He pulled her into him, his arms wrapping around her tightly, burying his face in her hair. She clung to him, her body shaking, the dam of her emotions finally breaking completely. She wept into his shoulder, tears of regret, of fear, and most profoundly of an undeniable, overwhelming love that had finally, gloriously, found its voice. A shared confession. Ilara's breath hitched, her confession hanging in the air, raw and vulnerable. Leo's eyes, still clouded with a weariness that had settled deep into his bones, slowly cleared, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps, or a burgeoning hope. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The simple touch sent a jolt through her, a warmth spreading from that point of contact, chasing away the lingering chill of fear. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "You have no idea what it means to hear you say that." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fragile thing that hadn't reached his eyes in weeks. I thought I'd lost you, really lost you, this time." He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her into the protective circle of his embrace. Her head rested against his chest, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart, a comforting counterpoint to her own frantic beat. "After the kiss," he continued, his voice muffled against her hair, "when you pulled away, I felt like I'd misread everything. that I'd ruined our friendship, pushed you too far. I was so angry at myself for being so stupid, so hopeful, and then the way you shut down, it was like watching a door slam in my face, and I just stood there, bleeding. The admission was quiet, laced with a pain that echoed her own self-reproach. She tightened her arms around him, burying her face deeper into his shirt, inhaling the familiar scent of him, a mix of his cologne, coffee, and something uniquely Leo that she had always found comforting. "I was terrified, Leo," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Terrified of what it meant, what it could change. I've always been so careful, so structured. And you just dismantle all my carefully constructed walls without even trying. And that kiss, it was like an earthquake. It shook everything. I panicked. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes, his gaze intense, searching. You dismantle mine too, Alara. Always have. Even when we were kids, you were the one who saw past the bravado, the jokes. You saw me, the real me. He paused, a new vulnerability entering his expression. And I've been in love with that version of you, the one only I seem to see, for longer than I probably even realised myself. It was always there, a quiet hum beneath everything else. Even with Sarah, it was there, a constant, undeniable current pulling me towards you. I tried to ignore it, tried to rationalise it away as just friendship. But it was never just that, was it? His honesty was a balm to her bruised soul, a confirmation of feelings she had secretly harboured, too afraid to acknowledge. "No," she breathed, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "It was never just that." He reached up, gently wiping away the tear with his thumb. "When you told me to stay, when you said you loved me," he trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. It was like the world tilted back on its axis, like I could finally breathe again after holding my breath for years. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling. The silence that stretched between them wasn't empty, but full, vibrating with unspoken words, with years of shared history, of unspoken longing. It was a silence that spoke of understanding, of recognition, of two souls finally finding their way home. Then, without another word, he pulled her into him again, a powerful, raw embrace that seemed to communicate everything that had been left unsaid for far too long. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she felt she might fuse with him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't want to be anywhere else. She felt seen, truly seen, not just for the meticulous archivist or the dependable friend, but for the woman beneath it all, the one who held a fierce, tender heart. And in his arms she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he felt the same. This wasn't just comfort, it was connection, deep and unwavering, a promise whispered in the silence of their shared confession. Building anew. The morning after, a soft, diffuse light filtered through Ilara's curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the quiet air. Leo was still asleep beside her, his breathing even and deep, one arm flung out, his hand resting inches from her own. She watched him, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The frantic energy of the previous night had dissipated, leaving behind a fragile, hopeful calm. When his eyes fluttered open, meeting hers, a shy smile touched his lips. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep and tenderness. "Morning," Ilara replied, her own voice barely a whisper. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. The simple touch felt monumental, a silent promise. Over coffee, the conversation began, tentative at first, then flowing with a natural ease that surprised them both. They spoke of the years, the unspoken words, the lingering questions that had haunted them. "I was so scared after the kiss," Ilara confessed, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her mug, of everything it meant, of what it would ask of me, of losing you entirely if I messed it up. Leo reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. I thought you regretted it, that you'd finally seen what I felt and recoiled." His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "It hurt, Ilara, more than I let on." "I know," she said, her eyes welling up, "and I'm so sorry for that, for making you think you weren't enough, when all along you were everything. They spent the day in a cocoon of their own making, untangling the threads of their past. There were no grand declarations, just quiet confessions and gentle reassurances. Leo helped her reorganize a small section of her overflowing bookshelves, their hands brushing as they passed volumes, each touch sending a jolt of warmth through Ilara. He laughed when she meticulously alphabetized her spice rack, and she found herself smiling more freely than she had in years. Later that week, Ilara found herself confiding in Chloe during their lunch break. "It's different," Ilara admitted, stirring her soup. "We're really talking about everything. It's terrifying, but also liberating." Chloe's eyes twinkled. "Well, good. Took you long enough, Vance. The whole office was placing bets on you two." Ilara rolled her eyes, but a genuine laugh escaped her. "Honestly, I think Dr. Thorne had the highest odds on us. He always seems to know things." Dr. Thorne, passing by their table, paused, a faint smile on his lips. "Ah, the subtle ballet of human connection," he mused, adjusting his spectacles. "Always a fascinating study, isn't it, Miss Vance? Especially when the score has been playing in the background for so long, unheard." He nodded sagely, then continued on his way, leaving Ilara to ponder his words. Leo started coming over after work, not just to seek comfort, but to simply be with her. One evening he found her struggling with a particularly stubborn jar of pickled onions. He took it from her, twisting the lid with practiced ease. As he handed it back, his fingers grazed hers, and he lingered for a moment, his eyes searching hers before he pulled away with a gentle smile. It was a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared space, their growing intimacy. He started leaving little notes for her, tucked into her morning coffee mug or slipped between the pages of her current read. Simple things, "thinking of you," or "had a good day." They were tiny anchors, connecting their worlds even when they were apart. The vulnerability wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkward silence where the sheer weight of what they were building felt overwhelming. One night, while they were cooking dinner, Ilara stumbled over her words, trying to explain a fleeting fear about the future. Leo simply listened, then pulled her into a quiet hug, holding her until the tension in her shoulders eased. "We'll figure it out," he whispered into her hair. "Together, Atsuaichiki." It was a commitment, not just to a relationship, but to the messy, beautiful process of truly seeing and understanding one another. Ilara realized that love wasn't just a destination, but a continuous journey of building, brick by careful brick, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. And with Leo by her side, she felt ready to lay every single one. Transformed solitude. The morning air, thick with the dark perfume of brewing coffee and the subtle sweetness of toasting bread, embraced Ilara. Clad in Leo's oversized shirt from the night before, she leaned in the kitchen doorway, observing his effortless movements, a grace she'd grown to cherish. He hummed a soft, meandering tune as he buttered toast, his shoulders broad and relaxed, a striking contrast to the earlier intensity that had once marked his presence. Dawn's light, diffused by the sheer curtains, brushed his profile, illuminating a faint, contented smile. This wasn't the upheaval she'd once dreaded. It was a gentle unfolding, a quiet renaissance. Her apartment, once a bastion of meticulous order, now hummed with a different vitality. Books still lined the shelves, but now some bore the tender creases of frequent reading, or a stray post-it note highlighting a passage Leo had found intriguing. Her once precise spice rack now boasted exotic additions, testament to his culinary adventurousness. Even the silence, once a treasured solace, had given way to a comfortable quietude, punctuated by shared laughter, the clink of ceramic, or the soft rustle of pages turning as they read, side by side, on the sofa. "Morning, sleepyhead," Leo murmured, turning with 2 steaming mugs. His eyes, warm and etched with fine lines at the corners, met hers. That simple gesture, the familiar depth in his gaze, sent a quiet surge through her. It wasn't just comfort, it was profound recognition, a feeling of being utterly seen. She accepted the mug, their fingers brushing, a contact that still sparked with surprising intensity. "Morning," she replied, her voice a little rough. She took a sip, the bitter warmth a welcome jolt. They settled at the small kitchen table, the morning ritual, a silent affirmation of their deepening bond. Leo recounted a vivid dream about chasing a giant sentient teacup through a library, his voice animated, his hands orchestrating the narrative. Alara listened, a soft smile gracing her lips, interjecting with amused queries. It was a simple moment, yet imbued with deep significance. This easy communion, this shared domesticity, was a bounty she hadn't realized she was missing. Later that afternoon, as Alara wrestled with a particularly thorny collection of fragmented historical documents, Leo worked companionably in the corner of her study. The rhythmic thwack of his leather-working hammer as he meticulously repaired the binding of an antique atlas offered a soothing counterpoint to the whisper of her papers. She glanced up, watching him, his brow furrowed in concentration, a lock of hair escaping across his forehead. He was so utterly himself, so completely present. It struck her then, with breathtaking clarity. His arrival hadn't shattered her life. It had transformed it. The quiet completeness she'd always cultivated in solitude had found a new dimension, an unexpected richness. His presence wasn't an imposition, it was an augmentation, a vibrant new hue added to her carefully curated palette. She still had her work, her routines, her solitude, but now it was a solitude enriched by the promise of his return, the echo of his laughter, the enduring warmth of his touch. Marcus's voice, a little sharper than usual, sliced through her reverie when he called later that evening. So, the hermit has finally emerged from her cave, and with a co-conspirator no less. Alara chuckled, leaning against the kitchen counter, watching Leo chop vegetables for dinner. It's not a conspiracy, Marcus. It's life. Life, huh? And what kind of life involves a man who looks like he just wrestled a bear and lost, cooking in your kitchen? Marcus's tone was teasing, but Alara detected genuine curiosity beneath the sarcasm. The kind where he makes excellent chili, she countered, a smile playing on her lips. And the wrestled a bear look is just his artistic flair when dealing with a particularly stubborn bookbinding. There was a pause on Marcus's end. He sounds good, Alara. You sound good. I am, she admitted, the truth of it resonating deep within her. We are. After she hung up, Leo turned, a carrot peel dangling from his fingers. Everything all right? Marcus checking in, she said, walking over and wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her head against his back. The warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, anchored her. He thinks you're a bear wrestler. Leo laughed, a rich, full sound that vibrated through her. I'll take that as a compliment. Does he approve of the chili? He approves of us, Ilara corrected softly, tightening her embrace. And so do I. A blooming future. The savoury fragrance of rosemary and garlic drifted from the kitchen, a fragrant herald of Leo's latest culinary adventure. Ilara, perched on the edge of a well-worn armchair in the study, a book resting unread in her lap, observed him through the archway. He hummed a meandering tune, his brow creased in focus as he rhythmically chopped vegetables. This quiet domesticity, interwoven with the vibrant threads of their shared existence, had become their every day. You know, Leo called out, not looking up, we really should get a bigger kitchen, maybe one with an island. Alara's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile, a gesture that had blossomed more frequently since Leo had so completely settled into her home and her heart. Are you planning to open a restaurant? His chuckle, a warm, resonant sound, seemed to dispel any lingering chill from the old house. No, but imagine the possibilities. Baking bread together, making pasta from scratch. We could host actual dinner parties. She considered this. Her former life had been a meticulously ordered landscape of cultivated solitude. Dinner parties, even intimate ones, had been an anathema. Now the notion held a certain allure, a vision of laughter, echoing through rooms that had once known only the rustle of turning pages. A larger kitchen would be practical, she conceded, a hint of amusement in her tone. Leo finally turned, a wide grin lighting his face. He leaned against the door frame, a wooden spoon clutched in one hand. Practical, yes, but also think of the mornings. We could both be in there, not jostling for space every 5 minutes. You could brew your elaborate herbal concoctions, and I could whip up some truly decadent pancakes. His earnest gaze held hers, and in its warmth Ilara saw not merely future meals, but a future carefully constructed together. It transcended a mere kitchen. It was about shared space, synchronized routines, and the deepening intertwine of their lives. "What else do you envision?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. The vulnerability in her question was a new sensation, a willingness to lay bare her burgeoning hopes. He pushed off the door frame and moved towards her, settling onto the armrest of her chair, his warmth a comforting presence against her side. Taking her hand, his fingers idly traced the lines on her palm. "Everything. I imagine waking beside you each morning, making coffee, bickering good-naturedly over the crossword. I imagine weekend trips, exploring quaint towns, stumbling upon hidden bookstores. I imagine growing old with you, Ilara, sitting on a porch somewhere, watching the sunset, still playfully arguing over whose turn it is to do the dishes." Ilara's breath caught. The tableau he painted was so vivid, so utterly real. For so long, her future had been an unprimed canvas, daubed only with the muted tones of archival dust and quiet introspection. Now, Leo was splashing it with vibrant hues, with life, laughter, and profound affection. The thought, far from terrifying, filled her with a profound sense of peace. "It sounds wonderful," she whispered, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. "It will be," he affirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "We've waited a long time for this, haven't we? Years of polite friendship, years of unspoken glances, years of denying what was right there, simmering just beneath the surface." She nodded, a pang of bittersweet recognition resonating within her. The memory of her abrupt withdrawal, of the pain she had inflicted on both of them, still lingered at the edges of her mind. Yet it also served as a stark reminder of their journey, of her own growth, and of how profoundly she had learned to trust the strength of their bond. "We did," she agreed, "but perhaps it needed that time to ferment, to deepen, to become truly resilient." He smiled, a gentle knowing curve of his lips. "Perhaps. And look at us now. We're finally giving it the space it deserves, the light it needs to bloom." He leaned in, his lips brushing against her temple, a soft, lingering kiss that conveyed volumes of affection and unwavering promise. The rosemary and garlic mingled with the subtle scent of his skin, a homely, comforting aroma now inextricably linked to her deepest happiness. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside, the rhythmic beat of Leo's heart against her arm, all these sounds coalesced into a tranquil symphony of contentment. Their path had been winding, fraught with misunderstanding and the spectres of past hurts, but it had led them here, to this quiet, sun-drenched study, to this shared space of blossoming love. And as Ilara looked at Leo, her heart brimming, she knew with absolute certainty that their luminous future was only just beginning.